A fighter who didn't need choreography or camera tricks.
Chuck Norris was already a certified badass.
You think you know exactly who you are looking at. You log onto the internet, you read the jokes, you see the exaggerated roundhouse kicks, and you completely buy into the cartoonish mythology of an invincible action star. You treat the man like a walking punchline because it is fun and easy to pretend that an untouchable demigod actually walks among us. But the reality behind the meme is profoundly tragic. The guy who spent the last 2 decades being glorified as an immortal, unfeeling force of nature has actually lived a life completely defined by severe trauma, paralyzing insecurity and helpless desperation. The indestructible legend is an absolute fabrication that completely erased the brutal, depressing reality of the actual human being. We are looking at a masterclass in identity hijacking. The internet took a broken, complicated man and forcibly turned him into a one-dimensional joke, completely ignoring the absolute hell he had to walk through. This is not a story about a guy who can cure cancer with his tears. This is the autopsy of a man who lost control of his own legacy. Let us rewind to the absolute peak of the digital circus. In the mid-2000s, a random web developer decided to start writing absurd, impossible facts about an aging, largely forgotten action star. The joke was supposed to be about Vin Diesel, but the internet randomly decided to pivot, and suddenly this washed-up karate instructor became the epicenter of the entire digital universe. The internet absolutely ate it up and refused to let it go. It became a suffocating, inescapable echo chamber, where everyone competed to write the most ridiculous, hyper-masculine joke possible. The audience completely stripped away any nuance of the man's actual career, reducing decades of martial arts discipline into a repetitive, mindless catchphrase that teenagers shouted in school hallways. He wasn't just surviving the algorithm, his entire identity was hijacked by it. When an entire global culture decides you're nothing more than an internet meme, your actual reality completely ceases to matter. The public built an indestructible digital cage around him, completely locking away the real person and replacing him with a marketable, superhuman caricature. Hollywood laid the absolute groundwork for the internet to completely run away with the delusion. Decades before the meme started flying, television networks and movie studios realized they could make an absolute fortune by selling him as an emotionless, unstoppable killing machine. He was carefully positioned as the ultimate American superhero who never lost a fight and never showed an ounce of weakness. The entertainment industry essentially created an unpaid PR army out of an entire generation of action fans. They built an absolute fortress of macho stereotypes around him. He could mow down an entire army of faceless henchmen without reloading his weapon, and the audience completely suspended their disbelief because they desperately wanted an invincible hero to worship. When you give an actor that level of completely fabricated invincibility, the boundary between the script and reality completely vanishes. He surrounded himself with stuntmen and choreographers who existed purely to make him look like a god on camera. That perfectly sanitized, ultra-violent echo chamber is exactly what eventually mutated into the viral internet joke that swallowed him whole. But then you look at the actual historical footage, and the whole untouchable narrative completely disintegrates on impact. The guy who supposedly came out of the womb throwing roundhouse kicks was actually an incredibly insecure, average fighter who lost the very first 2 tournaments he ever entered. He got completely dropped by a legendary fighter named Louis Delgado, and tasted absolute humiliating defeat. Instead of being born a superhuman, he was just a desperate kid grinding away in a sweaty gym. He had to completely rebuild his fighting style from the ground up, merging a dozen different disciplines just to survive in the competitive circuit. The flawless record the internet brags about completely ignores the brutal losses and the physical beatdowns he had to take before he ever held a championship trophy. The mask of absolute perfection was just a convenient Hollywood narrative. In reality, he was a guy who accidentally broke his own shoulder while practicing basic judo moves in South Korea. He was a flawed, vulnerable human being who had to claw his way to the top through sheer repetition, totally destroying the myth that he possessed any kind of supernatural talent. The massive tipping point that destroys the entire meme comes from his actual origin story. The internet loves to joke that he has no fear, but Carlos Ray Norris spent his entire childhood absolutely paralyzed by it. He was a pathetically shy, wildly unathletic kid living in absolute poverty, entirely defined by the terrifying presence of a severely abusive alcoholic father. Imagine the psychological weight of spending your formative years hiding in a cramped bedroom with your siblings, listening to your drunken father violently threaten your mother over $5 of grocery money. He wasn't out picking fights or acting like a tough guy. He was an introverted, deeply depressed kid who was just trying to survive an incredibly toxic, broken household. He completely bypassed the normal childhood experience and jumped straight into a survival state. The confident, unshakable action star was an entirely manufactured defense mechanism. He was forced to become the man of the house because his father was an absolute failure, and he carried that profound, traumatizing insecurity with him long after he became a multimillionaire. Make zero mistake, joining the military was never about being a patriotic badass. It was an act of pure, unfiltered desperation. He signed up for the Air Force the exact second he turned 18, because he desperately needed to escape the miserable, suffocating reality of his family life. He wasn't looking for combat, he was literally looking for a place to hide. The military sent him to a base in South Korea, and he took up martial arts simply because he realized he was too physically weak to arrest drunk soldiers without using a weapon. He didn't start training for glory. He started training because he was terrified of getting his ass kicked on the job. The entire foundation of his martial arts career was built on profound physical inadequacy. You have to realize the sheer irony of the entire situation. The internet holds him up as the ultimate symbol of fearless American aggression, but the actual man only learned how to throw a punch because he felt completely helpless. He built a safety net out of karate belts, ensuring that if he ever felt that childhood terror again, he would finally know how to defend himself. The entire facade of him enjoying the internet fame completely collapsed the exact second he filed a massive lawsuit against the creator of the meme. The guy who was supposedly too tough to care about anything was actually incredibly insecure about losing control of his public image. He dragged a web developer into court, whining that the jokes were racist, lewd, and damaging to his carefully curated family-friendly brand. Imagine the absolute nerve it takes to profit off violent action movies for decades, and then aggressively sue a random kid on the internet for writing absurd jokes about your toughness. He played the absolute victim, claiming the internet was ruining his legacy. He completely abandoned the stoic, unbothered persona and panicked because a digital trend was overshadowing his actual accomplishments. Listen closely to how hypocritical the entire sequence of events became. When he realized he was going to lose the battle against internet culture, he suddenly dropped the lawsuit, completely sold out, and published his own official joke book to cash in on the trend. He surrendered his entire actual legacy to a cheap internet gimmick simply because he realized he could make a quick buck off his own humiliation. The absolute darkest reality check completely shatters the joke that he is a one-man army. While the internet sat around laughing about him winning wars with his bare hands, his actual younger brother Wieland was slaughtered in a horrific Viet Cong ambush. He had to bury his own brother, facing the brutal, uncompromising reality of combat that looks nothing like a Hollywood script. He spent years heavily supporting the war, blindly cheering for the military machine, only to watch it completely chew up and destroy his own family. He eventually had to admit on national television that the entire conflict was a pointless war of monetary gain rather than a war of principle. The untouchable action hero was forced to watch a real war tear his family apart, utterly powerless to stop it. It is a masterclass in profound tragedy. When the internet jokes about your body count, but your actual reality involves standing over your brother's casket, realizing he died for absolutely nothing, the meme stops being funny. The macho action star routine was a completely hollow fantasy that offered absolutely zero protection against the devastating, agonizing reality of losing the people you love. The blast radius of reality completely destroyed the final remnants of the superhuman myth when his wife was essentially poisoned by the modern medical system. The internet spent years pretending this man could cure terminal illness by crying, but when his actual wife Gina was injected with a toxic MRI contrast dye, the supposedly invincible hero was reduced to absolutely nothing. He had to abandon his entire Hollywood career, watching helplessly as her central nervous system completely collapsed, leaving her violently tremoring in a hospital bed with burning nerve pain. They racked up $2 million in medical bills flying across the globe looking for experimental stem cell treatments, entirely desperate and completely powerless to fix the catastrophic damage. The man who made a living playing a completely unstoppable saviour had to stand in an emergency room and accept that all of his martial arts titles, all of his money, and all of his fake internet supremacy meant absolutely nothing against a crippling neurological illness. He was just a terrified husband watching the woman he loved slowly die right in front of him, entirely stripped of the superhuman armour the world had forced him to wear. So at the end of the day, why does any of this actually matter? Because it exposes the absolute terrifying cruelty of digital idolization. We as an internet culture decided to take a deeply flawed, traumatized human being and violently erase his actual life story just to keep a stale punchline alive for 20 years. We handed the ultimate crown of masculinity to a guy who spent his childhood hiding from an abusive drunk, and his adulthood watching his brother die in a pointless war and his wife get slowly poisoned in a hospital bed. The reality is, the internet breeds these emotionless caricatures because society is entirely terrified of actual vulnerability. We did not want to look at a complicated man who struggled with a brutal divorce, religious guilt, and crushing helplessness. We just wanted a cardboard cutout we could project our own power fantasies onto. He surrendered his humanity to the algorithm, and the digital paper trail of mindless jokes entirely buried the profound suffering that actually defined his existence. That is the only legacy the internet has left him. The punchlines will echo forever. The illusion of the invincible fighter is permanently carved in stone, and absolutely no one is ever going to remember the quiet, desperate reality of the man who was trapped behind the joke.